Hi, and welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm really pleased to have back with us Forrest Lien, who is the director of the Institute for Attachment here in Colorado. And Forrest, we had a huge response to your first podcast that we did together on what it's like living with a child with reactive attachment disorder. There are so many parents out there in this right now. And what I'm coming to discover is it's adoptive parents. It's also many foster parents, but it's also even sometimes step parents, which I hadn't realized. So there's a lot of parents out there struggling through this right now. And we've had a lot of questions coming in for you. And so thank you for coming back. First of all, I appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So what I thought we could talk about today is, what is attachment disorder? How do you know if that's what your child is struggling with or not?
Well, it's tough, I think, because you go out in the mental health profession and people really don't understand it that well either. I mean, when I was in graduate school many years ago, we weren't taught about this.
Right.
We were taught about normal child development, but not what happens when it gets disrupted. And so I've learned over the 30-some years how to look at this in a different way. So when I'm looking at whether it's attachment disorder or not, there's three different areas that I'm looking at. One is the early history. What was the moves, abuse and neglect? What was the developmental steps that a child was able to take in normal ways before the age of 3? The other is the genetics of the birth family. There could be mental illness that got passed on to a child, and that may show up later in their years, which confuses people. And then thirdly, what is the family they're living in? What is the triggers, the mental health of the family they're in? Because, these kids will trigger, whatever shortcoming a parent
Right.
has. And so when I'm looking at those three areas, I can get closer to the truth about what's going on. Attachment disorder, if we look at the diagnostic manual for definitions of mental disorders, it's called reactive attachment disorder. So it's rather vague. So the attachment field over the years have identified it more as attachment disorder, which isn't an official diagnosis in the DSM, but it separates out the difference. So reactive attachment disorder has a very vague definition. So if you look at that definition, you're going to be confused. So the attachment disorder field has really narrowed it down as far as symptoms and things like that.
Well, one time when we were speaking, you gave me your definition of reactive attachment disorder, and I'm hoping that it's the same one you use all the time and can remember just right off the top of your head, but that really impacted me. Can you share that with us?
So you mean as far as the DSM definition?
No, well, you said something about, it's the way that you react to attachment,
right,
and it's actually disordered. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, if you look at the developmental steps for a child, in the first 3 years, they really need that where their needs are met, where they're nurtured, they're cared for, they're loved, their needs are met. So internally, they learn to trust. I mean, this is in all our child development books. And so the first year is when you develop trust. And so if that is broken in that first year, children don't trust that their needs will get met. So very early on, they're figuring out how to meet their own needs. They, so they're pushing back. They're not as receptive to love and nurturance and holdings and things like that. So a child's conscience is now affected developmentally. And then the second year is that toddler stage where autonomy versus shame, guilt, and doubt is what needs to happen for toddlers. So if the first year is disrupted, then they go into an adoptive or a relative home. After that, children are still wanting to meet their own needs, so they may not be as receptive to limits and rules and things like that.
Right. And just going back, for people who don't understand, what would that mean in the first year of life that it gets disrupted?
Well, for example, if, let's say, a baby was in an environment with a parent that was drug involved, and so when a baby is in discomfort, all they know how to do is cry. And so their cries go unheard. So they shut the door, turn up the stereo, and keep partying. And so now a child, just keeps crying and their needs don't get met. So they cry themselves into a fear-based rage. until they exhaust themselves in crying.
Finally just collapse. Yeah.
Eventually a child becomes what we call failure to thrive, where they just shut down. Their needs don't get met. So now when they have a need, they just sit in the discomfort of whatever.
They don't even
is.
bother with the crying anymore.
Correct.
Because they know it's not going to help. So sometimes people will think if they get a newborn, let's say that they adopt a child, or they foster a child, or they're a step parent, or whatever. And a lot of times I think parents think, oh, this is just such a well-behaved child because they never cry. And that's not what's happening at all.
Right.
They're not well behaved. They're so in survival mode that they have shut down and they don't even express that they have needs anymore.
Right. Or the other response is where kids get abused when they cry. So, that drug-involved parent comes in and shakes them till they stop crying. And so now touch becomes dangerous. So they don't get nurtured. And so now, if a parent picks up an infant that, they're in a shock, startled PTSD mode, and so then they're going to cry and not get comfort by the nurturance of a parent.
Right.
So then what a parent does is put them down.
Right.
Well, I'm hurting them. There's something wrong here. So now a child...
Or the parent feels rejected themselves and thinks the child doesn't want me, doesn't love me, so I'll leave them alone. Or
Right. So now even in a healthy caregiver situation, it's a lose-lose for the child and for the caregiver, because they're confused about how to meet the needs of this infant.
Right. So then you were talking about the second year of life, which is the autonomy phase. What happens there?
Well, toddlers, normal development, toddlers are supposed to try to figure out how to get their wants met. Now it's shifted from needs to wants. So I want what I want. Hurry up and do it my way is basically what a toddler wants from a caregiver.
Pretty much.
And so when they don't get their wants met or there's a limit set, they'll cry or they'll have a tantrum or whatever to try to get a parent to back off about limits and rules because they want their way all the time. So a lot of developmental theorists will talk about the narcissistic wound of our humanness, where a toddler, wants the world to evolve around them.
Right.
And so if we don't set appropriate limits and rules and boundaries, that toddler will still have that narcissistic view that, if I rage or tantrum or do whatever I want, I get my way.
Well, and that's where narcissistic adults come from, is if the limits were never met in a healthy way and with love, if they're punished for that, then they continue on in that all through their life. And here you have a 40-year-old man or whatever who now thinks that their way is the only way and you will abide by my rules, and they become miserable to live with.
Well, the flip side of that, too, is if you indulge that toddler, if you give them their way all the time, then they grow up also self-centered. So if you abuse them or indulge them, they come out the same.
Right.
They still want things their way and they want to be in control.
Well, that's very interesting because you might think that you'd get opposites. If you indulge, it will turn out one way, and if you abuse, it'll turn out another way, and actually you get the same result.
The same result, yep. I'll talk to teenagers that have attachment difficulties. I say you have the Paris Hilton syndrome. You want things you want to be spoiled.
The entitlement.
Well, spoiling and entitling, indulging toddlers is an unhealthy thing to do.
Right. So when that doesn't happen with these kids that you see, we're wanting to build this autonomy into them so that they know that they're a separate individual and they can start to learn. I mean, they're not supposed to be taking care of themselves at toddlerhood anyway, but they can start to learn that they are okay when they're put down from mom. I can go learn how to live a little bit on my own, but then I can come back and mom can be that safe haven for me. What happens then when that doesn't happen with these kids?
Well, children are wanting to be in control. They're not allowing a caregiver to set limits and rules and guide them. They will do whatever they can to run their own world. And that's why we call it a disorder. It's not a normal developmental stage for kids. And so parents, if they don't have the understanding or the guidance from a clinician, they struggle through this. So they do the best they can with what they know. Right.
And what's it typically look like when these parents don't really know what to do? It seems like I've heard so many people say, well, they're just children. How can you possibly have your life ruined by a child? What does it look like with some of the families that you're working with? What can a 3-year-old do in a family?
Well, a 3-year-old, I've talked to parents all over the world about this, and there's a consistent symptom pattern that they have, and so I can answer their questions before they even finish, asking it, because I understand the symptoms of a child who, is superficially charming. They can be a 3-year-old and be really bright and go over to grandma's house and turn on the charm. It's control. They get what they want in that environment. And then at home, if mom tries to guide them or set directives, they'll, say no a lot, which a toddler does. And they'll rage. They'll rage to the point where it almost feels like they're going to die. And so a parent just gets exhausted around the control issues.
And how is that different from normal toddlerhood? Because toddlers will do that sometimes too. What's the difference between an attachment disordered child and a normal child in that phase?
Because of the quality of the relationship in the first year, where that child is bonded and attached to the mother and the father. So by the toddler stage, they still want their way, but they recover a lot quicker. They don't. I mean, to give you an example of my grandchildren when they were toddlers. One of my grandsons was pulling out grandma's flowers in the front yard, and just was having a ball. Yeah. And I went out there and set a limit. No, you can't do that. And he looked at me kind of startled that grandpa said no. And he got big tears, and that's hurting my heart when I watched that, but I had to allow him to sit in that for a while, and so he was crying and he felt bad. He felt healthy guilt and shame about what he was doing. And then I just scooped him up, held him close, loved him, said, I love you a lot, but you can't pull out grandma's flowers.
Right.
So because of the relationship he had, he was able to work through the limit setting because the relationship was strong enough that was more important to him than winning or being in control.
Right. Now, what would that look like if this was an attachment disordered child? So they're pulling out the flowers.
They wouldn't give up. They wouldn't stop. Okay. They would do it their way, or they would run away from the parent or not listen to the limit. And then they're pulling the flowers on the other side of the house.
And a lot of times the tears are not necessarily coming from the feeling of, oh, I've done something wrong and I got caught, and I feel that guilt that a little 3-year-old feels from pulling out grandma's flowers. Oh, I did something wrong and now grandpa's upset with me. I need to make this right.
Right.
They don't have that.
Right. They have what I call a shame core. They feel like a throwaway kid. They feel like they're not good enough. So when they get told no or restricted, to them it's that I am doing wrong, I am wrong. So they don't internalize healthy guilt and shame. They become shame-filled. And so they want to give it back to a parent. They want you to own it. They don't, because to them, love means you tell me yes all the time. You never set a limit.
So when they're giving it back, what does that look like? Obviously, it's I don't give up and I'm going to keep on with the behavior. But when mom or dad or grandma or grandpa takes them out of the situation, maybe they pick them up and move them, does it calm down?
Not with attachment disorder kids. They want to get back at you. They want to still get their way. So you might say, let's say a timeout, a simple timeout. You need to sit over here and have a timeout for now. They will move out of that position. They will do it a little different than how you want them to do it.
Right.
So they stay in control. And that's what makes people feel kind of crazy, is that they won't do the limit according to how I want them to. They always will do it different their way, or they twist it around.
And I think that you hit something, because it's not I think some of these kids can be very defiant, and you can tell. It's obvious that they're going, okay, you said do this, I'm going to do this. But other times it's very, very covert. It's manipulative, and it's very underhanded, and it's hard to even catch what they're doing.
Right.
Because you may say, I want you to sit in that chair for 5 minutes or whatever it is, and they might sit on the floor with their back against the chair.
Correct.
And so they're saying, well, I'm doing what you said.
Right.
No, you're not doing what I said. But then you start to question yourself as a parent, because, well, how much do I have to be rigid with this?
Well, and you start to wonder, how can a 3-year-old be that controlling, that subtly controlling.
Right.
And it's just crazy making with the mother figure. It's that I want especially to push mom away. So they end up treating moms in a more oppositional way than they do anybody else.
And we've talked about it before, but for those who haven't seen any of the podcasts, why is that? What is it about mom?
Well, there's a primal wound there. I mean, mothers are, made to, to carry a child, in utero. They have breasts to breastfeed children. I mean, they are the primal wound. They are the primal connection that children are supposed to have. And when that's broken, that they push
through no
moms
fault
away.
of the child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They push moms away. The nurturance, the love, the connections with a mother figure becomes much more triggering for them than the dad or any other family members.
So somehow, without even understanding it, the child somehow knows that they were rejected by the first mother, whatever that looked like, whether it was the mom's fault or not. I mean, she could have been killed or something like that, where it's not even, it doesn't have to be abuse.
Right.
But somehow this child, that bond with the mother was broken. And so whatever mother figure is put in their path, they're going to rebel against that because the fear of being left again, is that kind of what it is?
That plus, I mean, the moms even get blamed by the child for the wound, even if they didn't do the abuse, that they maybe stood by, and didn't protect them from like a male abuser, someone that hurt them or hit them or screamed at them. So no matter who does the abuse or left them, the mother figure is always the one that gets the brunt of the abandonment or the abuse.
Well, it just shows how seriously important that attachment between a mother and a baby are in those first couple years. So we've kind of gone through year 1 and year 2. What happens in year 3?
Well, they're still in the toddler stage at 3. They still want their way. It's around 4 and 5 where they are stepping out more, autonomously to have their way, but they're able to negotiate relationships in a better way is what we hope. That they can understand limits and rules and they start to internalize moral values. So 3 looks pretty much the same as 2.
And they have some language at 4 and 5 that they don't have at toddlerhood. It's really hard to communicate with a child who only has very limited words and all they do is cry or
Well, and their brain is maturing every year. They're more sophisticated cognitively at 4 more than they are at 3, and 4 at 5 as well.
So let's just jump back to that definition then of reactive attachment disorder. Normal child development, these children are going to attach in a healthy way. And when that doesn't happen, it's the way that they react to the attachment that is disordered. Is that correct?
Right. They have learned adaptive behaviors of control and distancing behaviors. So the more they're able to accomplish that control, in their mind, it keeps themselves safe.
And when you say distancing behaviors, what would those be?
Just really wearing out the mother, not doing it their way, raging, physically sometimes striking out, pushing back, not connecting to the nurturance of the mom. So the mom gets wore out and now becomes a mom who's not the same mom. Is more irrational, has less patience, is angry, is mad that other people don't see the same thing. They start to internalize that maybe there's something wrong with them as a mom, especially if this is their first mothering experience. And so now the relationship to the child becomes, I'm able to give my conflict away to you. I'm not safe. So their adaptive behaviors, the brighter they are, the more disordered they become because they are cognitively and emotionally saying, create distance and push the nurturing enemy away, the one who they should be letting in, they're pushing away. And as the mom gets more frustrated and angry to the child says, see, I'm not safe with you. You get mad at me or yell at me or do whatever.
Right.
So therefore the disorder just becomes more severe the more they're learning about how their environment, how they can get their needs and wants met on their terms. They just get more sophisticated at how to do that.
So what does that look like as they start becoming more and more sophisticated? I mean, we can imagine now that a toddler just it's a control thing, and so they're going to fight you. They're not going to do things the way that you ask them to do them. And they can wear you down because they just keep going and keep going and keep going. I remember hearing one time, you're never going to win a battle with a toddler because their energy, the amount that they can put into that is so much greater than what you have. They'll just outlast you every time, you know.
Yeah, but with normal kids, you need to win the battle.
Right.
Because if you give in to the battle, what does that teach a healthy toddler too? But with attachment disorder kids, they will go, you know, at a much higher level of control and pushing away than a normal toddler will.
Right. So what are some of the types of things that you would see with these kids that maybe you would never see with a child who is attached securely? What are some of the behaviors you're going to see?
Well, lying and stealing is a pretty prominent symptom we see. And if you think about lying and stealing, that's normal with toddlers. They don't have the internal moral fiber to know that stealing and lying is wrong. I see it, I take it, it's mine. But based out of the relationship, you know, if there's a quality relationship there, children internalize your moral values because the relationship is more important.
Well, and you talk them through that. If you see them taking something, oh, sweetie, you know, here's how we do things. If it's not yours, you don't get to take that. And they start to learn that.
Well, and it's a level of empathy. I mean, empathy is learned prior to the age of 3 based out of the relationship they have with their parents. So they're able to grab onto, you know, the fact that I take someone else's toy that makes them feel bad. I'm empathic towards their discomfort about their toy, or taking, you know, money or whatever it is you're taking belongs of others.
You realize it hurts somebody.
Right.
So you don't want to do that
anymore. They're able to
anymore.
connect to that.
Right.
So they develop an internal desire to please people, you know, on more normal terms. You know, whereas attachment disorder kids, they continue to lie and steal. I have parents often that will say, if they just quit lying to me and taking my stuff, I'll be okay. Well, that's a developmental symptom that stays with them until the relationship improves. So that's why we have adults with attachment disorder that are still lying and manipulating and stealing.
Right.
So that's where they become developmentally stuck. They're stuck in their development of autonomy versus shame, guilt, and hate. So they and doubt, because they become still the narcissistic wound becomes more prevalent, because in their mind that's the only way to win and get your needs and wants met.
Do they start to realize they're not winning?
You know, I think that they end up feeling more sad about the distancing or why they don't have friends and things like that. But then they just get feeling like they've been unfair upon, like someone is unfair to me, you know, and because I don't have a friend, you know, somebody's to blame for that. They have a tough time. Kind of the world
is against me.
They have a tough time taking ownership and responsibility for their behaviors.
Right. I am the parent of a RAD child that we ended up relinquishing after 8 years because these behaviors, we tried everything we knew. And once again, I wish I had known you at the time. We didn't. But all of the things that you're talking about, we experienced. And it's amazing how you can have a mom who feels pretty sane most of the time. And within 6 months, you start feeling like you're crazy. And you can't really, because it's so manipulative and you don't realize that a child of that age can do all of these control things and what their will is, that it's based out of that sheer need to survive. You don't really understand that. And so you're trying to use normal parenting techniques and they just don't work. And I remember just feeling like, what just happened? And it was so subtle that it was very, very difficult to catch what it was. And so you're trying to explain it to somebody. And they're like, well, that's just what kids do. Well, no, you don't understand the intensity and the sheer level of exhaustion that goes along with that.
Well, plus the fact that these kids act differently to the strangers, you know, extended family members, so they don't show the same symptoms. So that's why mom starts to feel a little crazy. And then, you know, they're even getting more indignant and convincing people like, did you see that? You can't believe what he or she did. And, you know, and then you just go, there's something wrong with mom here.
Yeah.
Something
And
wrong.
I remember questioning myself because I know there would be something on the counter. I knew I put it there, and then it's not there. And you go to the child, how could you think I did?
Right.
There's this,
We call that crazy lying.
yeah.
That I could take that glass of water right from you and put it over here somewhere. And you said, you took my water. No, I didn't, Mommy.
And how could you even think that I did? Why would you say that about me? Don't you love me?
Yeah. So the lying becomes crazy lying. It becomes pathological lying. I saw you do that. And they will argue to the point where you start and you give up. You don't.
Yeah,
want to
you
fight
question your
anymore.
own. You don't want to believe that your child is lying,
Right.
Like that, and it makes no sense. There's no reason to lie. They're not going to be in trouble if they took the water. Yeah, I remember we had a thing about cookies. You could have a cookie. It's not a big deal to eat a cookie. The cookie jar is off. There's crumbs coming out of your mouth. Did you eat a cookie? No, I didn't eat a cookie. Well, you're not in trouble if you ate the cookie. But you might be in trouble if you lie about eating the cookie. I didn't eat the cookie.
Right.
Why would you say I eat the cookie?
Yeah. I mean, even things like mom makes them their most special meal, but they're mad at mom for something else. And so they'll resist and push the food away just to make mom feel bad.
I have joined some Facebook groups around attachment disordered kids. And some of the things that I'm hearing consistently are the kids will wear dirty clothing. And we experience this. What is that about?
Well, more than likely, that's because it's a value that mom has.
Because mom wants them to wear clean
if
clothing.
mom didn't care about that, they wouldn't make it an issue. It's about what mom cares about. I'm going to push back against the most. Yeah. And so that's why it's a disorder. And it's a crazy-making disorder on the mother figure. Whoever the mother figure is that jumps in full-time. I'm not talking about, weekends with grandma.
Right.
I'm talking about full-time.
And it probably won't be in childcare or at school or things like that.
Well, even, as far as assessing it, we have a RADQ assessment tool. It's a Likert scale of 30 questions, and you measure each symptom based out of severity. And the only person that can really accurately fill that out would be a mother figure that's lived with the child at least 5 months. So even dad fills it out, and it's a total different score than mom. It's much less severe with the dad because he's not seeing the same behaviors, unless dads are in a mothering, nurturing role.
Right. If they're the primary caretaker
right.
and they're very empathic and they're really trying to get the love relationship between that child, then they might get it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So when you are helping to diagnose some of these children, what are some of the questions on this scale?
Well, it's all on the symptoms. There's, symptoms that we just talked about: lying, superficial charming, raging, controlling behaviors, physical acting out. There's a whole list. There's 30 questions that you measure them on. And that's something on our website, too. You can go to. It lists all the symptoms.
Okay. And what's your website?
It's www.instituteforattachment.org.
And we can link that onto the description on the podcast here too, so people can find you and at least be able to find the questionnaire so that they can look. So mothers can kind of assess their child if they have this.
Well, there's a tricky part of that. It's a Likert scale, so it depends on the honesty of the parent filling it out. And so if you have a mom who maybe wants to not have the child anymore, they're going to put all the symptoms at a 5. And then at the end of that, I'll say, well, we can't help you. This child's too severe, because they come out way, way high. And so then it says that this child isn't family material. So then if kids come out in this severe range of attachment disorder, it's questionable whether we can help them either. So it just depends. If a parent wants to answer it honestly, it's usually right on. But it's not the only assessment tool we use. I need to look at the early history of abandonment and abuse and neglect. I need to look at the genetics of birth parents. And if you look at the genetics of birth parents, there's 5 categories of birth parents that hurt their children. One is, an antisocial personality, which is the personality that will sell their kids for drugs, sex, or whatever. They don't care about anyone. They have no empathy.
Wow.
So those children are learning that I'm not important at all. The next would be borderline personality disorder, which is an adult attachment disorder. You can look that up in the diagnostic manual for mental disorders, but it's an adult attachment disorder where they're figuring out ways to manipulate their environment on their terms. The next would be paranoid schizophrenics. That's a genetic mental illness. And then the next one would be alcohol and substance abuse, and the last one's bipolar. So those are the 5 mental illnesses that are the prominent diagnosis of birth parents that hurt or neglect their children.
And so what do you do with the children if you know that their birth parents had a history with one of these?
Well, I'll look at the developmental stages. I'll ask a parent, tell me what this child's development was as they hit their developmental targets. And if a child does, let's say they are catching up, they were responding to mom, they were developing friends, they were doing okay in school, they were following directives and things like that. Now it's not attachment disorder. Now I'm looking more at a genetic mental illness because let's say the child behavior dramatically changed at 9, 10, 11 years old. We have to make sense of why that happens. Did anything change in the family? Was there a divorce, a death of a parent? What happened to throw a wrench in their developmental progress, their catch-up progress? And if there was anything that changed, then we have to rule out mental disorder, which is typically around mood disorders, things like that. Because if you look at a mental illness of parents, alcohol and substance abusers have a high correlation of a mood disturbance, bipolar, of course.
Right.
And so we have...
And so you see those passed down from... Okay, just genetically. So you need to be able to rule that out. And if you discover that there is that the attachment seems to be fairly strong, but they're still having some of these issues, then you can narrow it down to this might be a mental illness.
It's good news because the mental illness is easier to treat than the attachment disorder.
Right.
Sometimes kids have both, though.
Well, it's amazing to even say that. I mean, people don't understand how serious attachment disorder is. But you're saying it's easier to treat
yes.
than it is to treat something like bipolar or paranoid. What were some of the other ones? Borderline personality disorder.
Which is adult attachment disorder.
Right.
Antisocial is adult attachment disorder.
I mean, when you hear antisocial disorder, that seems very extreme. That's a pretty severe disorder to have. And yet attachment disorder is more challenging to treat than that for some of these kids.
Well, antisocial is attachment disorder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, would be what it would be labeled then as an adult.
Right. We don't put those labels on kids.
Right.
So they won't identify character disturbance in children because that's an adult diagnosis.
And they're still developing at that age.
They're developing their character disorder.
Right.
So if you catch it earlier, to really identify it, then you have a better chance to shift their character around because cognitively they're getting more, they're maturing, they're taking in their environment, they're developing their view of how to be in the world because all of us as human beings want to avoid conflict and have joy. Well, if you have a character disturbance, you're always figuring out how to keep people in control in your controlling world for your own gratification. Well, that doesn't work well. People don't want to be around controlling.
Right.
So the close relationships become, that's a problem because who wants to be around someone that's a control freak?
Right. And I mean, we all have control issues here and there, but we're talking about when it really is a character disorder. And with some of my clients, we talk about changing character. And I think there's people out there who believe that character just can't be changed. It's set, it's so ingrained. And I don't believe that's true. I mean, I think it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of courage to be able to dig down and look at why you do what you do and learning how to change something that has been so ingrained since you were a toddler, since you were a little baby. But it can be done.
Yep. Right, but it's pretty highly specialized work with someone with a character disorder.
Right.
Because you're talking about having someone give up control to be vulnerable. Well, vulnerability to them is like dying. Right.
And you're not just saying that. I mean, that can sound like, oh, well, you're being dramatic in saying that. You're not just exaggerating here. I mean, truly, it feels like they are not they're going to lose themselves. They're going to, it's so terrifying to be vulnerable. I would rather give up every relationship in my life, all my money, my career, my home. I'd go to jail over it because it's just not worth the vulnerability.
That's why there's a continuum of any kind of character disturbance. If you take any psychological evaluation, there's going to be a continuum. You're going to be elevated in certain areas of your character. Doesn't mean you're in the disorder range, but everyone has their own issues about wanting to be in control, like you mentioned. But at the same time, though, you can be empathic and be vulnerable with others, and so it's that dance of relationship that's based on empathy. That's the key word.
Right.
Empathic people will be able to give up control in certain situations.
Right. And just let's talk about empathy just for another minute here. How would you describe empathy?
It's just that ability to be able to be in tune with someone else's feelings, to be in tune with being sensitive to your feelings, your vulnerability, and things like that. So I can connect with you in a way, not to make you better or to fix it, but I can connect with you. I can be empathic with your sadness and your vulnerabilities, your fears, and things like that.
So first of all, it's a recognizing that somebody else even has a feeling. And then it's a care or a concern that because you matter to me, I have compassion. I want to understand why you're hurting. So I may stop my behavior because I realize that it's hurting you, even if I don't understand why. But I'll come to you and say, tell me more about that, or, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. And it's genuine.
Right.
And the kids with reactive attachment disorder don't have that sense of compassion or empathy. They don't really understand that what they're doing is hurting you. And even if it is, my need for survival trumps whatever it is that you're feeling.
Well, an example would be someone may misunderstand empathy with being in control. Like, if a child figures out that, I can give this teacher what they want and tell them how, smart they are and how good a teacher they are, and that teacher says, wow, you really care. Well, it still loops around to serve them. And so as soon as that teacher, sets a limit or isn't happy with them, now the relationship's cut off. So now there's no empathy. And we've found that with teachers, that work with our kids, is that in the beginning they get kind of sucked in, and they think it's empathy when it's just control and superficial charm and things like that.
Well, and I think even as a parent, there were times that I felt like maybe there is empathy here. Maybe there is. But as I look back, it's like, was there a gain there? Was there something that made the child feel more empowered or feel more control? If I tell you, oh, I'm so sorry, then do I get my freedom back? Or, it's not really about, I care about you.
Yeah, it's not about you. It's always about them.
Right. So, wow. Well, I know there's a lot of people out there struggling to find out, is this what my child has? Is this what I'm dealing with? And we're going to talk again. We're going to do another podcast, and we can talk more about what to do if you discover that this is your child, or if you're in the process of adopting or taking in a foster child. What should you be looking for, and how can you prepare yourself to be a successful parent to these children? Because there is hope. They can be parented. They can learn these things, but you can't parent them in the same way that you parent a child that is not disordered with their attachment.
Right.
So thank you for joining us again, Forrest. I was going to say podcast.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you next time on Broken and Brilliant.